You're listening to Investify, preaching financial independence and assisting investors to achieve a more flexible and free lifestyle through smart financial planning and real estate investing. If leaving the corporate world and jumping into this thriving industry is what you desire, tune in and listen to stories of like-minded individuals who made the leap to financial independence. Equip yourself with the right tips and tricks to start your real estate journey, making active or passive ventures that are highly profitable and rewarding.
What's going on, everybody? You are listening to Investify. My name is Craig Curlop, aka the Fi Guy, and I'm here with my co-host, Miss Allie Garcet. What up, Allie? How are you doing today?
What's up, Craig? I'm good. How are you?
Stark contrast of your shirt to your background today. I feel like you're just doing this now to just be a little different, but
Yeah, always be different, which is, I feel like, one of the mottos from our guest today, Mike.
Yeah, Mike. Mike's a good friend of mine. He's a fellow abundance guy. Allie, you've had the honor of being on his podcast before. Personally, I still haven't been on it, and I give him crap for not inviting me all the time. But now it's almost like the joke as to now we're never gonna have him on, so we can just keep the joke alive. It's kind of like Grace, my wife. She has not left me a review for my book that I wrote, the house hacking strategy, 4 years ago. And now it's just like her funny thing, which is like, yeah, no, I'm never leaving you a book review.
That's funny.
Yeah. If anybody's listening, go hit up Gracitude on Instagram, send her a DM and say, go leave a review for Craig's book. And that would be really funny if she gets bombarded with messages.
She's going to slap you after this.
She's going to slap me. I'm probably going to regret saying that, but do it anyway. It'll be worth it. But anyway, yeah. So my good buddy, Mike, he's awesome, right? So he is the trajectory of, if you're listening to this and you're still in your W-2 job and you're kind of seeking a way out, he's like 5 years ahead of you right now. And so listen to his story and you can follow his path pretty much step by step. It's pretty repeatable. He did get some luck along the way, but so will you. And then just you follow him step by step, man. I think that's just like the best way to do it, right? Is to find what other people have done that have worked and just copy and paste. You don't need to reinvent the wheel in real estate.
Yep. Especially if they're not too much ahead of you. And yes, he had luck, but he also had bad luck as well. So it just like everyone else will have too. So it all evens out. And as long as you just take action, you'll be good.
Yep. And before we bring Mike on the show, we just want to ask you again to please leave us a rating and review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to this podcast. It helps us out tremendously. And so after you do that, we can get right to the show. This episode of Investify was brought to you by the Fi Team, a team of investor-friendly agents that service all 50 states. If you are looking to house hack, to invest, grow your portfolio, and want a true investor-friendly agent on your side, go to thefiteam.com and click Get Started, and we can't wait to have a good conversation with you. Mike DeHaan, welcome to the show, my friend. How you doing today, dude?
Doing good. It's good to see you. It's funny. We live so close, but I feel like I don't see you that often, even though we literally live like 45 minutes away from each other. But, as adult life tends to go, I guess.
Yeah, I don't, it's too bad. We do need to see each other more. We're going to get out on the disc golf course before the season ends here. And yeah, we got to make a point to see each other more, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to do it before we get plunged into, the 4 months of darkness that we get up here in the Northwest, which is not my favorite. But
then you can come down to Tucson and visit me.
Yeah, I would love to.
Yeah.
I'm a big Tucson fan. I've been down there a couple times in the past. It's a cool spot.
Was it Mike? Was it you that told us that we get the most darkness in the whole country of the 48 states?
Yeah,
so behind some mountain or something.
Well, yeah. So basically, with how the time zones work, because we're so close to the mountain time zone line, and just the way the sun travels, basically Spokane County, Kootenai County, and then the couple counties that are up north are the only ones in continental U.S. where it gets dark before 4 o'clock in the winter. So like at
Yeah.
the worst, we have sunset at like 3:45. It's brutal.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah. I remember that day being like, where am I?
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
anyway, so Mike, speaking of where you are, let's first start talking about where you started down your journey towards financial independence.
Yeah, so I went to college as most people do, kind of did the traditional path. I didn't really enjoy college, but I did it because it was what everyone else was doing, and I'm in my early 30s, and when I was at that age where I was looking at going to college, basically if you did anything else, you were kind of like a loser. Like that was back before anyone even considered trades, or the biggest fallback that people had in the early 2000s was going to the military, right? So I went to school, went to a Gonzaga University here in Spokane, got an engineering degree, kind of struggled my way through school, and I didn't, you know, have a real interest in engineering, but I did it primarily because when I started in college, it was 2009. I went to a career fair. There was no companies there because we just had the crash. So no one was hiring anything. And all of
Wow.
the companies that were there, they were hiring engineers, specifically electrical engineers. So I was like, cool, I want to have a job when I get out. That's what I want to do. And I also knew that it would pay well. So that was kind of what like led me into that path, even though there was no legitimate interest. So struggled through school because of that. But I always told myself that once I got into the workplace and I was making money, that I would enjoy it more. So I was able to get a job right out of school. Worked at a couple different places. Worked at Boeing, which was kind of like a big dream job, I guess, for a lot of people. And the whole time that I was there, I just really struggled with the fact that I was in this big corporate machine, and it was not something that like I wanted to be my identity, right? It was just as like a cog in this massive thing with limited vacation time, limited sort of like freedom and availability. And that's when I started getting into the financial independence movement. I first sort of like heard about it on different podcasts and things. And then got really into like the financial independence subreddit, right? And like the FIRE movement. And I started doing things almost like what I would consider the wrong way, where I was trying to like extreme save and budget and like really minimize my lifestyle so that I could, retire, I guess, when I was in my 50s. But ultimately I decided that that was not going to be how I wanted to spend my life to get to that point either. So I started to vary from there.
Why do you say that saving is the wrong way?
Yeah. So I think it's one of those things that is contrarian to most people believe, that it is easier to save money than it is to make money. And as I started to, I guess, get more exposure to entrepreneurship, and I met more people that were my age or sometimes even younger that were making like real money, I realized how much more you can make versus you can save, and how honestly easier it is to do that while also living a decent lifestyle. And I think one of the saddest things that people do is pursue financial independence so aggressively that they give up tons of, enjoyment in their life. They lie to themselves and say that they really don't mind eating bulk rice and only going to a public park for their only form of entertainment, right? They tell them that's what they're okay with to do that so that they can retire when they're in their 40s or 50s. And it doesn't make any sense. I think that like the sweet spot is being able to save while also learning how to make more money.
Yeah, I think I do agree. And honestly, my mind has changed over the years. Like when I first started, I was totally in that boat of trying to save every penny, because it seemed like saving is something that you can do tomorrow. You can do it today. You can cut stuff out. Making money sometimes takes a little bit more time, but there's that unlimited scale to it, right? And so I do agree that the best way to do it is to make as much as you can and spend as much as you need to be happy, and make sure that delta is very large, and you invest that difference. And then you can likely retire much before 40 or 50. I think that's the biggest flaw with the financial independence movement, is that if you just save and save 50, 60, 70% of your income, put it into an index fund, you're going to retire in like 10 or 15 years. But if you actually are making serious money and then it becomes like an 80 to 90% savings rate, but you're spending more as well, now you can retire in your 30s pretty easily.
Exactly. And like, I firmly believe that if you figure out how to crack that code and find balance, you can do it in a couple of years, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And, even though I approach things that way to start, and I don't necessarily agree with that now, I will say that because I had a decent paying job, I developed those habits and I did save a lot of money. It did give me the freedom to start pursuing entrepreneurship full time, to really chase financial independence. Because ultimately, after working as an engineer for 5 years, in 2018, I decided I needed to do anything else. So because I had like a little bit of a nest egg built up, right? Because my wife and I were used to living on a really small budget on way less than we earned, I was able to just leave my engineering job. And it was very easy for us to cut out all of the little luxuries that we had and just start living off of her job. And she was working as a graphic designer making 30% of what I was making, right? But it was easier to take that leap with those habits already established.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that transition. Going from W-2, losing a lot of your money, and like, where were you at? Like, did you have rental properties or did you just have a big lump savings?
No, so real estate wasn't even really on the map at that point. Like, I knew about it a little bit, primarily because my now business partner, he owned a rental property, and I knew a couple friends that had kind of gotten into that. But I kind of had a slight aversion to real estate, mostly because I didn't want to, have to worry about fixing toilets and all the things that everyone else worries about, right? I was one of those people that's like, why would I ever own a rental property? I'm going to have to wake up at 2 a.m. to go fix a toilet at a property. And that was like enough of an irrational fear that prevented me from taking action at the start. And even though I was listening to Bigger Pockets stuff at that time, that's how I got introduced to you, Craig. That was way back in 2017 when your first episode on Bigger Pockets came out. But like, I was in a position where, I had like $100,000 in cash saved up, that I'd come over from my 5 years as an engineer. I had about probably $20,000 or $30,000 in my 401k that I had been aggressively investing into over the previous years. And, my wife and I, at that point, we were living, including our mortgage and our food and everything else, we were living on $4,000 a month, which isn't like rock bottom low, but my wife was making, she was making like $55,000 a year. And so we were very comfortably able to live on her money. And then what I would do just to make sure that we never had to creep into our savings is I hustled doing other stuff. Right. So I would drive for Uber, and, in the evenings I worked at a gym, just coaching CrossFit classes for several years, honestly, while I was just trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And what those things did is they allowed us to cover our costs, not go backwards, but also gave me the freedom to really start to dabble in different ways to make real money, which was ultimately my goal. Right. So
what were you mentioned like you can cut too much enjoyment, out of your life on the road to FI. Were there any, does that apply to you specifically, where you realize that you cut stuff out that provided enjoyment for you? Like, what did you need to put back in your life?
Yeah. So like there was little stuff, like we didn't really travel anymore. Like we love to travel. So we would travel to places that were local. This is a great benefit of living somewhere like Spokane, Washington. There are some really awesome places that you can go and visit and spend time that's high value within a driving distance from here. Right. All through the mountains, tons of outdoor activities. You can drive over to Seattle if you want to have like a metro experience. So we cut down on that. We pretty much stopped going out to eat at restaurants. The biggest areas that we saved money were getting really into things like meal prepping and doing like bulk cooking and stuff like that. And so and that's a habit that we've still continued through to today, and it helped that I had an interest in fitness. So I was really conscientious of like my macros and things like that. But it was amazing actually when we started to dial in on like your grocery bill alone, when you're not buying like any pre-prepared stuff or pre-chopped stuff and you're just buying everything kind of bulk, it was like $400 or $500 a month that we were saving all of a sudden. Mm-hmm. And just like tons of little things like that. And, even like entertainment stuff, like we didn't like cut Netflix or those things. That's $15. I can figure out how to make $15 in a month, right? It's very easy, and so things like that won't necessarily make you rich. It was more like the larger things that, just like, I wouldn't say we necessarily cut, but we just kind of like shifted how exactly we enjoyed them.
Yeah, if you're at the stage of saving, more than 50% of most people's budgets are going to be spent on food, transportation, and housing. Mm-hmm. And so figure out how to cut out those three, or like make them really small. You can't ever really cut out food, but make that really small and you're good, right? Like, don't worry about the the cup of coffee at Starbucks and the Netflix subscription, if that's like something that you truly enjoy. I mean, think about how much cheaper a Netflix subscription is than like going out to eat once a week, instead of like you and your wife can have a home cooked meal and watch Netflix versus going to a restaurant. You're saving money by having Netflix.
Yeah, exactly. How we kind of started to view things like that was, what is like our cost per usage, right? Or like our dollar per hour for the enjoyment, right? So like going out to dinner and going to a movie, for example, that would be $100, if you do both those things for like 4 hours. That's basically $25 an hour, right? For that. Versus, like you said, you can do the watch Netflix at home and, cook dinner at home. That's like $3 an hour, honestly. And so just things like that started to add up very, very quickly as we started to look at them.
100%. Awesome. And so now you're in this place. Like, did it take a little bit of a hit to your ego to tell people that, hey, I'm an engineer at Boeing, to, oh, I'm a CrossFit instructor, or I'm an Uber driver?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, honestly, that was probably one of the hardest parts of the transition, was changing my identity that way, because I went from being a guy, I was in my I was in my late 20s, like I was 27, I guess, when I made that shift. And so I was someone that, by all intents and purposes, people are like, oh, you've got it figured out. You guys, you own a home. We did own a house at that point that we were able to buy, right? My wife had a good job. I had a good job. We kind of had like the golden goose jobs where we had like benefits and everything else teed up. And all of a sudden I just like walked away from it. And, a lot of people thought that I was dumb. It's one of those things that, like, when you do something drastic, everyone thinks you're stupid until you're successful, then you're a genius, right?
Yeah.
And that's 100% the situation that we went through. And honestly, the hardest conversation, everyone always asks like how my wife dealt with it. I'm very fortunate that I have a very good marriage and a very supportive wife. And I remember actually when I made the decision to leave my job, and I was driving to work, and it was one of those days where I got 2/3 of the way to work, and I didn't even realize that there wasn't like music or a podcast or anything playing. It was just like dead silent, because I was like dead inside,
Yeah.
And I just called my wife and I was like, I think I need to quit my job, and she was like, what are you going to do? And I was like, I have no idea. She was like, well, do you think you'll be happier? And I said, yeah, probably. And she was like, cool. Well, that sounds good then. And then I think I quit my job like a week after that. I put in my notice.
Wow.
But, it was, the hardest conversation was honestly with my parents, because they were very proud of the trajectory that I was on, and the fact that I had gone to school at like a decent university. I went to school on scholarship. I had this engineering career, especially my mom, who came from kind of an academic background. She had a lot of pride in being able to go to her social circle and say that her son's an engineer. And I remember even for years after that, even after I started the real estate game, my mom was always just like, oh, she's like, so what do I tell people that you do? She like wasn't happy with that, especially for 2020 and 2021, where everyone and their mom was like getting into real estate, right? And they weren't doing it successfully. So, it was a change in identity. My friend group viewed me differently. Everyone that I knew viewed me very differently, but ultimately, I don't know, it was something that I felt I just needed to pursue myself for my own sake.
Did you lose any friends in that process, or like become less close to them?
In that process, so honestly, in that process, I would say I made more friends. Misery loves company, right? When you get into a situation where all of a sudden you're kind of like up against the wall, people can kind of relate to that. Honestly, where I've lost friends is when I started to make money, and all of a sudden I don't have like the same inclination to complain about stuff anymore. Right.
Oh, really?
But when I stepped away from the engineering, my friend group grew. I don't think I've ever been more popular in my life than when I went into that zone. So
wow, I'm sure there's some sort of psychology behind that. I don't know it, but I totally could see it. And so I mean, so you're kind of figuring this out, right? Like, I guess, so you're obviously not taking your mom's advice. You're not taking your friend's advice. I suspect you're probably not taking your ex-bosses or employers' advice. And so, like, who got you on this trajectory now to real estate? Like, there had to be some figurehead, some mentor that you were looking towards.
When in terms of the figurehead specifically, honestly, it was probably like Bigger Pockets kind of like spearheaded me that way. Just like the brand as a whole. because I think that's where most people get started in real estate, right? And that was sort of what got me into that mindset. When I left my job, like I said, real estate wasn't really on the map. I'd heard about it a little bit in different things, but over those first couple of months, I just dove head on into, reading entrepreneurship books, learning about, building wealth, listening to different podcasts, wide range of things. And my original plan was actually to get into like tech startups. So like I taught myself how to code over a few months, and I started working for this company based out of Chicago, as that was like an early phase startup. And my primary goal was I wanted to have something that I could make significant money and I could do it from anywhere and that had upside via an exit or something like that, right? So startups appealed to me. And I started getting into real estate because when I was working for this early phase startup, they don't pay you a lot of money. Like it was very, very little. I think I was making like $3,000 a month or something at that point. And I wanted to, I guess, like escalate that and make it so that I could make more money without having to necessarily work outside of that zone. So I was like, well, the easiest passive income from what I've heard is from rental properties, right? And so I started looking around for properties. I knew that I didn't want to do any work because I was a tech guy at that point, right? I just have to be fully focused on that. So I bought these two, like actually new build properties that were nearby to where I lived. And I didn't even know how to analyze a rental property really at that point. Like literally my mindset was, okay, so my monthly payment's going to be $1,200. I'll be able to rent them for $1,600 for these two properties. I'm going to make, $800 a month between two of them. I didn't consider property management, vacancy, any sort of maintenance, anything. I just assumed that I was going to be printing this money. And so in order to buy these, what I did is I liquidated my corporate 401k, the 120 grand or whatever I had in there at that point. I paid all the penalties, the taxes, all that sort of stuff. And I just dumped them into these properties. I went and I couldn't really get a mortgage because I didn't have a W-2. So I worked with a commercial, like credit union here, got it set up as like a commercial loan, established like a real estate entity and just sort of explained the situation. So I got like the, not 30-year, but like the 25-year amortized commercial loan, like you can get on rental properties. And that was how I got started, was with these two sort of turnkey properties. And obviously once I bought them, I learned that my expectations for cash flow and stuff was not right. But I still started having a little bit coming in, and that kind of gave me the bug.
All right, Allie, you know what this sounds a little bit like?
This sounds like the
For
real deal.
All right, Mike, we didn't even warn you about this, but so this is basically the first deal that you ever do. And so we want to kind of dive deep on this deal, even though it doesn't sound like it's your best. It sounds very unintentional. And so let's just get into it. And so you mentioned it was basically a portfolio, quote unquote, of two new builds. You said they're in the Spokane area. And so how did you find these deals? How much did you pay for them? How did you finance them, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah. So they were across the street from each other, like literally nearby me in an area that I drove past every single day. And, I saw them starting to be built, and I saw like the sign for the builders. So I called the builder directly, and I was like, hey, I want to buy some of these properties, like what are the price points? What are the details? And they gave me all that sort of stuff. And then they're like, oh, we need a realtor. And I was like, really? I didn't even know that was what I needed at that point, right? That's how green I was to real estate. I thought I just like called the builder and bought a house. I knew I could get a mortgage because I already owned a house, but I didn't realize that if you're buying a new build that you still have to go through the same process. So I had a friend of a friend who was a realtor help me with the purchase. And, we went through and we bought these two new build houses for $200,000 a piece. So I needed basically $50,000 down to buy each one. And the crazy thing is because we bought them sort of like pre-build, we got a really low prices versus what they actually retailed for when the houses were done. So we bought them each for $200,000. I signed the contract, right? And then by the time they built the whole development, the same houses as the one that I built, they were selling on market for $260,000 to $270,000. So I accidentally walked into a bunch of equity. Like I definitely got lucky, but that's also what happens when you take swings, right?
Yeah. Is that something that's repeatable? Like if you go to a builder and say, hey, I want to buy this thing, when they're halfway done? Or did you just happen to catch it at the right market time where 6 months later the market appreciated that much?
So you can definitely buy them early, right? And so like with ours, like they had barely even broke ground. Like they were just starting, like the road had been completed and they were just like all dirt patches. And I could see like on their website, like the different specs, and I wanted to buy 2 3-bed, 2-bath houses. So, I think it's repeatable to an extent. Like this was back in 2018. So the market hadn't really started to boom yet. But they were willing, I think, to work with us on the price because they were going to be getting these commitments, like honestly, 6 months before the houses were even completed. We put down solid earnest money and everything else. So it was worthwhile for them to consider that.
The 50,000 that you put into it, that was total for both of the houses?
No, that was per. So basically I put $100,000 between, because it was 25% down on each house with the commercial loan. So it was the entirety of my 401k that I pulled out.
I'm sure you're an engineer, so I'm sure you calculated is it worth it to pull out my 401k or is it not? So how did you come to that conclusion?
Yeah. So honestly, then this is just kind of my anti-establishment view. I was looking for a reason to axe my 401k just because it was my singular attachment to the corporate lifestyle that I hated. So honestly, it was kind of my way of sticking my middle finger to the man of just like, I'm going to take control of my own money. And I hate that I have this. And I'm going to instead, pay all the fees I don't even care and just pave my own way with the money that I felt like should be mine. So,
yeah, I was debating taking mine out for a while. I had about the same amount as you from a corporate job. And I, for some reason, just never did. But I remember doing the math being like, if I've got 100,000 in this 401k, I'm going to end up paying taxes plus the 10% penalty. I'll end up with 50K. So essentially 50K goes away. And like 50K is not going to mean anything to me when I'm 65 years old, right? If I'm on my current trajectory and I'm doing what I want to do. And so that was like my mindset to it. Did you think that through?
Yeah, a little bit. So I did some basic numbers with it. And, I had the penalty that I had to pay on it, which was a 10%. And then the benefit that I had is you pay the tax rate for when you pull out the money. I didn't make any money that year. So my tax rate was like not that high. Like that was pretty much all the money that I brought in. So I just dealt with it at that point. And it's one of those things that, and again, I know I was an engineer. I was not a good engineer. I'm not like that sort of mindset. Like if you look at my disc profile, I'm kind of like a high D, right? So I definitely, lean on the more like impulsive, like kind of driver, like take action instead of like the super calculated, risk averse sort of personality. And so I guarantee you there was a way that I could have done what I did without having to pay all the penalties and taxes. But even if I knew that, I probably still wouldn't have done it just because I had such an aversion to the fact that it still tied me to my engineering career.
That's so funny. Hey, ego can be expensive, right?
Yeah.
That's what I always say.
Exactly.
But it's okay. You're doing just fine. All right, man. And so on this house, right, you said each mortgage was $1,200. Did you in fact rent each out for $1,600 like you planned? Everything went to plan?
Yeah. So I did exactly what you'd expect, right? I listed both the houses for $1,600 and had literally zero interest from anybody. So my plan started to crumble around me almost immediately. And I remember being like 2 weeks in and I had maybe like one walkthrough and that was it and no bites. And I was like, oh my God, I made such a big mistake. So I played around with some different pricing, figured out how to like advertise rental properties. And then what ended up happening, again, I got a little bit lucky, was I got a call randomly from the state that they had been driving through. And they were like, hey, we have basically a program where we work with people that have disabilities. We see that these houses are new, they're rancher style. We would love to potentially rent these properties from you if they're still available. And I was like, absolutely. And they were like, oh, it's like $1,600 a month. Like, what is all this? Sort of hit the box. And they said, yeah, that's fine. And so I ended up setting up these long-term contracts with the state that were for these assisted living facilities that kind of came on accident. The cool thing is they originally started with $1,600. When I was going through the process, the lady that I was talking to, which is funny that she did this, she was like, actually, we're approved to spend up to $1,900 for rent. For working with us on like a longer lease, we'd be willing to give you that. And I was like, cool, sign me up. And so I went from being unable to rent them to all of a sudden getting more rent than I was expecting, with the agreement that I was going to allow the state to use them for a longer period of time. And then I just wrote into my contract with them, even though we were doing a 3-year lease, that every year I would be able to reassess market rent and bring it up. So it worked out very well, and I had some stability there for 3 years. And so,
Wow.
again, I got lucky, but you got to play ball, if you want to have those
Wow.
opportunities. So
That's incredible, man. Wow. And so were
Pass
there
that
any
phone number
downsides?
along.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right.
Did you find that there were any downsides to having the government be in your stuff at all, or?
Yeah. So the first issue that I faced with it was basically in one of the houses was fine. In one of the other houses, the first person they brought in with disabilities, they didn't tell me was going to be someone that was severely mentally disabled. And so they didn't disclose that to me, and they caused a lot of damage to the house, and they also terrorized the neighborhood for about 3 months before I finally evicted them. And so that came with some issues. Like, I have this picture, it's on my Instagram if you scroll back a ways, of it's in the house, and there is like a body print in the drywall that someone like had gotten like shoved through the wall. So I had to deal with that. I evicted them, they fixed up the house, and then I ended up having, good ones after that. And I basically just made the ground rules of like, physically disabled is fine. You can have people in wheelchairs. That's what this house is meant for. You can't just put like people that are severely disabled to the point that they're dangerous in like a family neighborhood. And I don't know what their MO was with that or what ended up happening with that guy, but I wasn't going to stand for it. So that was the main issue. And then honestly, the only other dilemma that I faced with them was after our time with them expired, they decided they were going to move on to different properties that were a bit cheaper. And dealing with them to get like the wear and tear and everything else that had happened with the property repaired was a freaking nightmare. Like, absolute super long bureaucratic process where they like made me go and get like 3 quotes from like all these different people, and they had to be like their approved contractors, and like the contractors would just be like marking up stuff an insane amount, but then they would only cover like up to like $10,000 in repairs. And it was just a huge back and forth headache. And I ended up being able to get it figured out, but I had to float repairs on both the houses, like out of pocket costs for a while, until I was able to get that money. So that sucked, but all in all, it worked out just fine. It was just some extra hurdles that were not ideal.
So you go from being scared that you're not going to get a tenant to someone, out of the blue falling into your lap saying, hey, actually, we can pay you more than what you're asking for. Can we do that? All the way to eviction, and then having a lot of trouble getting money back for the problems that they caused. And you still decided to continue. What was that mindset like when your first 2 properties, you're like, oh man, this isn't the best. This isn't going well. What was your mindset like there to continue?
I mean, like, that is a good question. And I don't know. I think that's just a personality trait that I've always been fortunate enough to have, is like, I recognize when things are atypical sort of circumstances, right? Versus like truly bad circumstances. And, like, it was a headache for sure, but like the eviction, all that sort of stuff. And I'll say, like, it was an eviction. It wasn't like a true, like, I went to court eviction, but basically we had to kick the tenant out, deal with like a bunch of renovations. That was a huge headache that I kind of had to facilitate because I was close to it. But because it was a contract with the state, they still paid rent. So it wasn't like I was suddenly underwater. And I had to come out a little bit of money to front the contractor that was doing the work, because I chose my guy to do the work. But they were able to recover that cost to me pretty quickly because they were still using the property. So they saw it as like an investment. And then, when I went through the process of having to get all the money when they moved out, that was just last year. That was just 2022. So at that point, years had gone by and I was much more seasoned at that point. So it was a headache, but it wasn't the end of the world.
So do you still have that house today?
I do. Yep. I still own both of them. I have them as traditional long-term rentals right now. And I have just families in each of them.
What are they renting at?
So they're at that 2,400. And where I really lucked out with those. I bought them for 200 grand each. And then with the run up that we had in 2020 and 2021, I refinanced them in late 2021 when rates were super low. And so I went from like the 5.5% rate that I had with them down to like, I think it's like 3.125 or whatever it is, and did a full cash out refi. And I pulled out, I don't know, they both appraised for about 400,000. One was 400, one was 405. And I just did a full cash out, took out a bunch of, tax-free money. And because the interest rate was so much lower and the rent was so much higher, my cash flow didn't skip a beat.
Nice.
That's incredible, dude. So, I mean, that's a home run deal for your first deal, even though you kind of just stumbled into it, like literally doubled. Both houses doubled in like a 3-4 year period. And then also getting that. So is your mortgage payment is still $1,200, and so it's still you're making $1,200 per month per property over the mortgage, not including property management and stuff.
Yeah. So now I have property management, different things on each house. I make about $600 net after you include set asides and all that sort of stuff. So
that's amazing, man. And you said it a bunch of times, but like sounds lucky, right? If you listen to my first deal, which many of you already know, like it sounded lucky. Allie, I'm sure your deal sounds real lucky. But I will say, like when I was getting in 2017, I thought people who got in 2014 were really lucky, and I thought we totally missed the boat. And so I think there's always gonna be that you wish you started earlier, but you just got to start now. We hope this episode is inspiring you to take action. If you're thinking about becoming a real estate agent or an agent who wants to join an investor-friendly team, just hit me up on Instagram at the Fi Guy, because we are growing our team in Denver, Seattle, San Diego, and Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, but also adding to our network in all 50 states. And if you didn't already know this, the Fi team provides a super supportive environment with one-on-one coaching, accountability, and ongoing training to help develop kick-ass, rock star, investor-friendly real estate agents. So hit me up on Instagram at the Fi Guy, shoot me a DM, and we'll set up a time to chat. Can't wait to chat with you. So, all right, Mike, where do you go from here, man? So you got these two properties. You're kind of you feel in real estate now. Mm-hmm. What happens next?
Yeah. So, that started to give me the bug a little bit. I had that passive income coming in, and even though there was some ups and downs with it, I recognized the potential. And then I started to face my current issue that I had, which was the capital that was going to be required to keep buying more properties. Right. So by that point, the startup that I'd been working for 6, 7, 8 months at that point, I kind of like gone up and down and was not looking great. So I started leaning more and more into the real estate stuff as like kind of my full-time gig. And because I recognized the capital problem, I was like, well, what can I do to get more capital with, real estate at like a little bit faster pace? And what does everyone do? They go to look at flipping houses, right? So I knew nothing about doing renovations, how to flip houses, how the process worked. I didn't really have any money at that point. But I just started going to local meetups and just telling people that I was looking to start flipping houses and trying to find partners. And I've ultimately found someone that isn't my current business partner, but was someone else that I partnered with at the start, that they had the money, right? I had the time, and we decided to partner up and buy some flips, and I would basically do the work and they would front all the cash, and we would split things 50-50. And so that's how I got my foray into the active income side of real estate. And the first houses that we bought, this was back in early 2019. We're buying REOs. So, bank owned properties that you work with an agent, just like off the market. I had been able to connect in all of my networking with a realtor that was kind of like one of the go-to REO agents here in Spokane that was willing to sell us pocket listings. So we didn't have to compete with other people that were on the market for looking for these flip opportunities. And ultimately we ended up buying our first flip, which was a kind of like major-ish fixer-upper on the south side of Spokane that had been abandoned for 2 years. I didn't know anything about how to like analyze renovation costs and that sort of stuff. We went and like walked through it with a contractor who gave us like a bid, which of course ended up being very different from what it actually cost. And to make the long story short, over the course of the flip, it took us 4 months from when we bought it to when we sold it. Pretty much everything went wrong that you could imagine. in the property, from all the pipes bursting when we turned on the water and causing $12,000 worth of water damage, to we had a subcontractor that stole a bunch of money. We realized that we had not evaluated properly looking at comps, because our house that we didn't have a garage, and all the comps that we looked at did have a garage. So basically it brought down our value quite a bit. We just didn't even think about that. And after 4 months, a ton of work, I was able to scrape out $4,000 in profit for myself. So it was an extremely low dollar per hour, but it was a massive education.
Welcome to real estate, my friend. I think that's the initiation, right? I feel like everyone, once you start kind of getting scale, has a deal that just blows up in their face, or it's extremely stressful. And so be ready for that.
Exactly. And one of the things that I think I recognized about it was, even though I didn't make a lot of money for it, like the downside risk honestly was relatively low unless we were negligent with it, right? Like even if we had lost some money on it, like for us to lose like extremely significant money, like, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, something crazy, stuff would have had to go so bad that it was like I was willing to kind of take that risk. And I even went, we had this conversation with my partner at the time, and I was like, if we lost like say 20 grand, like that would be such a far off shot from our expectations. We weren't in a position where that was going to be like catastrophic. So we were willing to take that risk to learn and to take the shot. It was disheartening when we sold, and that was all I made. But we'd already bought like our next flip before that one sold. So we were like forced to sort of continue with it. Our second one was much more successful. I think I made about 35. From that, I bought a separate rental property, which was a duplex that my wife and I actually intended to burr. So that one, we bought it. We're doing a lot of the work ourselves to try and like cut costs. I didn't have a partner on that. So that was literally me and my wife, like school of YouTube, like learning how to do all of the work, right? Because we wanted to save money wherever we could. We ended up burning that duplex, pulling all of our money out, use that extra money to buy a triplex, which sort of gave us like our first like little nest egg of rental properties. And then by this point, it was late 2019. So this was all over the course of 2019 that all was coming together. And at that point, I decided that I wanted more opportunities. And that's when I approached my now business partner, and we decided that we were going to go direct to seller and start going around all the middlemen that we were working with through the wholesalers and the realtors and stuff like that.
And is your partner that invested in that first deal where y'all made very little money on, was she still with you, or he still with you through that time?
Nope. So yeah, so it was a she, and we don't work together. I mean, after we were still had some projects going on, honestly, up until COVID started. We had our last project that we were working on together through early 2020. And this was after I started my current wholesaling business. And our plan was to, finish that one up and then kind of like go different directions. And then ultimately what ended up happening with that one is we were unable to sell it when COVID happened. And we got kind of desperate, and we ended up fire sailing it like sort of summer of 2020. And we took a decent little loss on that, but we were able to recover all the capital that we had both put into it and just move on to next things. So
nice. Okay. And so then you're realizing that it sounds like, I'm kind of reading between the lines here, you realize the power in flipping is actually fine, is the purchasing, right? It's fine. And so that's why you decided to basically make a whole business of going direct to seller. And so how do you approach a business partner to do something like that, like to make something bigger than yourself?
Yeah. I mean, so it's challenging, right? Like when it comes to my current business partner, he was my best friend in college. And he was already, I would say, like real estate curious, right? He'd already, he owned a couple of properties. He was the original one who exposed me to like the average person that owns a rental property when I moved to Spokane. And over the course of the previous years, like we had walked properties together, looking at potentially, I was looking at if I could do flips with like my one partner, but also with, Dan, who's my current partner, and have like stuff going on in tangent. That was my initial way of trying to scale, was how can I like find partners to do all these projects with without having to bring as much of my own money into it. And so we were we walked a bunch of stuff and we were kind of like fresher with our options. So then deciding to go direct to seller was a pretty natural transition because we had both recognized that with the stuff that was being brought to us, it just wasn't fitting our box. We needed to go find it ourselves.
Yeah, no, that's really good, man. And so how did you scale that?
Yeah. So, the first thing we did is we joined a mastermind that sort of like help us build the business framework for it. And when we first started going direct to seller, we were just using direct mail, which is the traditional sort of old school mailing tactic, right? You just send out a bunch of pieces of mail to targeted lists that you can pull online, people that have bankruptcies, liens, anything that's publicly recorded distress. And we didn't know anything about like how to run a sales process, how to even like analyze these sort of deals that are distressed, all that sort of stuff. And we just took action and started putting in reps and just trying to figure it out. And just looking back at some of our first attempts at like making offers, it was so hard because we were like insanely embarrassed at the offer prices that we were making for these people. Because, like when you're working with a realtor, you kind of have like them to hide behind. The person that usually talking to you, they've put stuff on the market. But our first house that we ever walked together, I will always remember Dan and I sitting in these people's living room. We knew that they wanted $300,000 for the house, and we knew that we were going to be at like 140. And we had built like this like business case of like all these papers that we were going to present to these people about why we were going to be so much lower than what they wanted, as if that actually means anything. Right. And we sat in these people's living room for like 2 hours, just like building up the courage to talk to them. And over the course of that, they're getting visually more and more angry and frustrated with us. But we were both just too chicken to actually like rip the Band-Aid off until finally Dan goes, we're at like 140. And it got dead silent. And the lady just goes, you guys need to leave right now. And we were like, okay. And we just like stood up and we just like walked out. Yes, we were humiliated. And we were like, what do we even do at this point? Right. And so we had to go through that whole process, and it took a while. So from when we started marketing to when we got our first deal was about 5 months. And at that point, we were about $30,000 in the hole on our marketing endeavors. Okay. But what drove us was, over the previous years, we had been looking at deals from wholesalers. I bought a couple deals from wholesalers, and I would see these $30,000, $40,000 fees that they would collect. Okay. So, and I'd known a lot of those people, and I was like, they're not any smarter than we are. If they can figure it out, so can we. So what was driving us was all we need is like one deal, and now we're even. And then from there, we just need another deal, and now we're profitable. So we just kept grinding until we figured that out. But not going to lie, when you got to like month 5 and you were $30,000 gone, it definitely got hard. But we were focused on the lead indicators of the fact that we were still having conversations. People were still calling us. We're still able to make offers. And we knew that if we did that long enough, eventually things would come together.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Yeah. And so like, what is it, if someone's thinking about getting into wholesaling piece, right? Finding off-market deals, like what kind of person, like describe your ideal avatar of a person for someone that wants to get into wholesaling?
So it's the best wholesalers that we found are people that are good at sales and are good with people. Like people get into wholesaling because of their interest in real estate most of the time. The challenge with it is it's not a real estate business. Okay. It's a marketing and sales business that's focused around providing solutions for people. And that took us a long time to figure out. And that's honestly why I think most people, when they get into it, aren't successful, is because they are going into a situation where you have like a widower who, has never made money in her life. Her husband just died and she's about to lose her house. And you're going to go in and tell her how her kitchen sucks. So you need to pay her house. You need to buy her house for a discount, right? Instead, the approach needs to be like, okay, ma'am, how do we make sure that you are able to move on with your life? You're able to have the security that you desire, and you're able to, not have to worry about any of the legal situations that you're currently dealing with. And so the ideal avatar is someone that is willing to empathize with the people that you're dealing with and willing to put in the boring work on the title end, the legal end, the financial end with these people, and just accept that the real estate is kind of your collateral for that, right? But the actual house itself isn't the be all to end all for every conversation.
Yeah, I love that. I think real estate in general, right? It's all a people business. Like if you don't like people, then real estate is not the business for you. Um, yeah, awesome. And so, where are you at today? So just kind of a quick recap of, started at your W-2, kind of left that, was kind of in like limbo for a while, Ubering, CrossFitting, et cetera. You found real estate, liquidated your 401k, bought these rental properties. Then you saw the power, started flipping, that got into wholesaling. And now, where's Mike DeHaan today?
Yeah, I'll give you basically a year by year. So 2018 was the first year that I was not an engineer. On my tax returns, I made $15,000. Okay, for the entire year. 2019, I started flipping houses. I owned a couple rental properties. My tax returns at the end of the year, I think I was like at 92,000. Okay, 2020, we started our wholesaling business. Started doing some deals. I bought a bunch of rentals in that first year. I think it was $190,000 at the end of the year on my tax returns. And then 2021, we started to scale. We started doing a huge, I guess like much larger operation, putting a ton of money into marketing, and I made $1.2 million in 2021. Right. So it escalated very, very quickly. And within that time too, we were able to accumulate a portfolio of, I think it was 54 rental units at its peak, like 32, 33 properties. I've started selling off a handful of them. So it's one of those things that like in hindsight, or like people that know me, it looked like it was very fast, but it happened over 4 or 5 years. So a ton of like work and grind and stuff is in there. And now in 2023, so 2022, the market kind of turned over. We held on. We always ran a lean ship, so we were able to still come out okay. I think I made about 250 grand last year. And then 2023, we have now started to scale this into a national business, where we have basically this partnership style program where we work with investors around the country to stand up and operate these wholesale businesses. And basically what it looks like is they buy into our system, we run the entire operation, and then we get like a piece of all the deals that close in exchange for running the back end of it. So it's been our attempt at scaling the wholesale business.
I love that, dude. Well, one thing I'm gathering too is like when you're when you're W-2, you make $150,000 a year every year, and that does not change. Your tax returns probably don't change year over year, but you just showed that it can hockey stick up, and then it can plummet. But even still, your plummet is 250. I mean, it's $1 million less, right? That's a lot of money less, but it's still $250,000, which is as much as a lot of like high level people in these companies are making. And so, and that's the glory of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, and I think that one of the key things about why I've been able to maintain really strong financial independence as well is like a lot of our general expense habits outside of our travel. We travel quite a lot these days, but we never changed those from 2018 when I first left my job. So I still do like the meal prep thing. I'm still very intentional about not having outside expenses. If we're going to go out to dinner, we don't just kind of do it frivolously. We want it to be something that has some sort of like intention and stuff behind it. And so even though our costs have increased in different ways, it's not like I'm going out and buying like a brand new BMW, right? I still drive like a leased Subaru Crosstrek with like a $300 a month payment, just like the most like Spokane car, and a lot of the other stuff that we have is still super minimalist. So it allows us to keep reinvesting our money. And honestly too, because we made such a good chunk, such a short period of time, just keeping that either invested or in the bank, it gives you a different level of financial freedom. Because if you have kind of like a fixed spending rate and you have a huge runway, you can go for a very long time, even if things get really bad, right, within your business. So that's like a different level of financial security or freedom that I don't think is talked about entirely.
Yeah, no. And you mentioned you leased your car. Talk to us a little bit about that, because I know you're pretty unconventional in that way as well.
I am. I know that's something that people will always argue with me on that. And I'm a big like believer in not having debt on depreciating assets. Right. And when it comes to like buying a car versus leasing a car, so like my options, when it comes to a car, you can either buy like a old car that's dirt cheap, whatever. You have to worry about maintenance. it's a car that like doesn't have any bells and whistles, whatever. And that people will always argue, it's like, well, if you buy this kind of car, there's never maintenance and those sort of things. I was like, yeah, but I don't want like an old beater car, right? I don't want like a 2010 car. I like having the Bluetooth, I like having all the general stuff. And then when it goes to buying a new car, obviously you're locked into debt. You're going to have to pay down at some point. And in my mind, I'm like, I would rather just have it be like a fixed payment that's the same every single month that I can work into my budget. And I can take that, $30,000 in debt that I would have had and go buy another duplex with it or go do another flip. And then I'm going to come out significantly higher, like net positive than if I had locked in that debt or that higher monthly payment. And I don't have any other expenses in my car either. Like I don't have to pay for any maintenance or anything like that. So it's just like something that I work into my budget and it's very easy to account for.
Yeah, I think you've got the most compelling case I've ever heard to lease, for sure. And so I can't say I disagree with where you're coming from. It's just like if you like having that pride, which is expensive, like I said earlier, works this way too, right? Of actually wanting to own something, right? And not like, yeah.
Yeah. See, and I don't like, I'm not a car guy, right? And honestly, like it's literally just a mode of transportation for me. And so what I want is I want it to be comfortable. I want it to be efficient. I want it to not cause me headaches. And so when it comes to like a leased vehicle, it checks all those boxes. I never really have to worry about anything with it, and then when the lease is up, especially with Subaru, I can just trade it in for a new one, and then like my fixed cost every year is, between 3,600 and $4,000. I think my new one that I'm getting here in a couple of weeks is going to put me at $4,000 for the entire year. And with my current situation, I can figure out how to make $4,000 in a year if I need to. Like it's not that big of a deal.
Right. Totally. Love that, Mike. Mike, man, thanks so much for coming on. We're gonna head into the final part of the show now, which is the final four. And but before we get there, do you have any other words of wisdom for the audience?
I mean, I think the biggest thing that, like when you hear stories like mine or other people, it's not that hard, right? Like honestly, like stuff takes a lot of work, but if you are willing to put in the time and take some of the small risks, especially with real estate, it's all about taking risks with an asymmetrical upside. I think where a lot of people get in trouble is they like take these big risks hoping for like a 20 or 30% return. The great thing with doing like flips or like wholesaling or things like that is they are risks that you can take that can have a, 10x return. Right. Mm-hmm. And so you need to position yourself to be in a position to do those things as opposed to trying to be like less risky for less return if you want to actually make differences. Right. And it's the reason that you hear about all these people on Instagram and everything that have figured it out with real estate is because it's not that complicated, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. Yeah. And I think like figure out the highest. I mean, again, I think house hacking is still probably the least risky, most highest return on your investment that you can do. So, but the downside of house hacking is you can only do one a year, technically. And so like, what's the next best thing? Like perhaps it's wholesaling, right? So definitely look into that if you guys are still new and wanting to hustle and get into real estate. All right, Ellie, you know what time it is?
It's time for the
final
four.
All right, Ellie, kick us off.
First question, Mike, what book are you reading right now?
I'm a big Alex Hormozy fan, especially because I'm, on the entrepreneur side. So I've been going through his $100 Million Leads book that just came out. As I've shifted out of the identity of just like a real estate investor and towards the actual entrepreneurial side with like our current business that is much more of like a services facing business. Anything regarding like leads or like business practices or things like that, I just can't get enough of right now. So I've really been a fan of his stuff.
Yeah. If you like him, you'll also probably like Russell Brunson stuff too. You've probably already read it though. Yeah.
Yeah. Russell Brunson's awesome.
Cool. Mike, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Oh man. Honestly, the best piece of advice that it's funny. I don't even know if it's like a piece of advice, but it's like some words of wisdom. Was when I was first starting out in real estate and I was like worried about some of the, issues and downside risks with it. And it actually came from my business partner, Dan. He's like, what are you worried about? It's just money. He's like, are you going to be homeless if things go bad? No, then don't worry about it. It's just money. Like you'll be able to figure it out. And I think that was such a, I contemplated that after I said that for a long time. And that really shifted my view to having more of an abundance mindset around money versus a scarcity mindset. Because, I realized that if you are a proactive person in your life, that's completely true. Like if you are somebody that isn't, and you really are just doing nothing, sure, you should be scarce with it. But if you are someone that is driving to do things with it, you can always figure out how to make money.
I love that. I think I need a bite of that advice sometimes.
Yeah, same. I think that's helpful to a lot of people. Question number 3, what's your why?
So I know a lot of people have things around, family and that sort of stuff. I don't have kids. I'm married, and, kids might be on the horizon. They might not. Honestly, my why and something that's become like my main driver has been, I have this huge passion for like helping people realize that you don't have to be miserable for your entire life, right? And how easy it is to actually get out of like kind of the treadmill that most people get into. So I had on my one sheet that one of my goals is I want to help 100 people make their first $1 million. And so that's a big reason that we've started, like I started my podcast, Collecting Keys. We started a mentorship program that we're doing through there. And we started our partnership program because my goal is to help as many people as I can, like me, to get to a similar situation of what I've been able to figure out. And I found that, even as my business has grown, doing deals is gratifying. But when we have people that like come through our community and different things, and all of a sudden they are like having life changes, like that gets me fired up more than anything else. Yeah. So that's become my primary why.
All right, man. Final somewhat question. Do you have any hidden talents?
So I have this really weird skill. I can't do it intentionally, but I have this way of being able to skip lines that my wife always makes fun of me for. So like we'll like go to like a restaurant or like to, I don't know, go to the airport or whatever, and we'll like walk right up to the front of the line. And then by the time we've like gone through the process, we'll look behind and there's like 20 people behind us. I don't know what that is. My hypothesis is that I'm a very punctual person. I tend to be early. And so like if we're going somewhere at 12, I'll get there at 11:55. So I think it's because I beat all the people that are meeting there at 12. So, but it is a really weird skill that has proven to happen over and over and over again for the last 10 years. So I'm going to say that that's my hidden talent. But
or they're just trying to be like you, Mike.
Yeah, maybe.
You need to go to Mike. Disney World.
Yeah.
He doesn't buy the speed pass because he doesn't need to.
He is the speed pass.
The speed pass buys him. Yeah. Awesome, man. I love that. All right, Mike, where can people find out more about you if they want to kind of join your wholesaling club there? Where can they go for that? Just, this is you now.
Yeah. So if you want to find more about what we do and, how wholesaling works and how we've built our business, I have my own podcast, which is called Collecting Keys. You can find it anywhere that you listen to your podcasts. It is like it's not necessarily like a wholesaling focused show, but it is a real estate business show. So we do deep dives into like how we scaled our business, the ups and downs of like running a business kind of at scale, and how exactly you can go from being like new to building a profitable enterprise. So that's the greatest way to hear like my long form content. Besides that, you can follow me on Instagram at Mike_invests, and shoot me a DM on there. I'm always happy to chat with people. And if you're interested in hearing more about our mastermind and the stuff that we do over there, you can just shoot me a DM on Instagram and I'd be happy to hop on a call with you.
Awesome. Mike, thanks so much for hopping on, my friend. We'll make sure to get together soon. Maybe I'll come over to Washington, even though it's a lot further away than Idaho is from Washington. But
you can bring out your horse and buggy or whatever you guys out in Idaho use. And, it'll probably take you a few hours, but it'll be okay.
Yeah, I'll hire someone to pick up the poop along the way, and we'll be good to go.
There you go.
All right, man. Thanks so much for coming on, dude. We'll talk soon.
Awesome. Thanks guys. Appreciate it. You too.
And that was Mike DeHaan. Allie, what'd you think of Mike?
I related to his story so much. When like leaving the W-2, the drive where he mentioned he drove almost all the way to his work without any music because you're so like dead inside, man. Mm-hmm. I've been there, and I know that other people listening to this podcast are either there now or have also been there in the past. So this was a really, really relatable story.
Yeah, that's what I love about it most is it's super relatable. And you could see that he grew quick, but that quick was like 3 or 4 years. And so, we're sitting here as we record this 2023, and when you hear 2027, that feels like forever away, right? But a lot of you listening now, remember, like when we were getting started, like for me in 2017, 2018, 2023 felt like forever away. And so just know that in 2027, you're going to be very happy that you got started here in 2022 or 2023 or whenever you are getting in. So with that being said, I hope you all liked this episode. If you did like it, again, please let us know by leaving a rating and review, letting us know on Instagram. I'm the Fi Guy. Allie is.
Allie the agent.
And we will see you all next week.
See ya.
That's it for this episode of Investify. We hope that these nuggets of real estate wisdom lead to more savvy financial planning and a clearer path towards financial freedom. For more content like this, subscribe to the show at investify.com. Don't forget to leave a rating and share it with your friends. Together, we can transform more real estate newbies into successful and clever investors. Thank you so much for listening. See you on the next one.